All right, welcome back to the Morning Update Show. I'm your host, Omari Salisbury. My partner in crime, Trey Holiday, is on vacation all this week. And now, welcoming to the set, once again to the Morning Update Show, candidate for mayor, Bruce Harrell. How are you?
I'm good. You struggle with that last name, don't you? Thanks for having me back.
All right, man. Well, thanks for coming back.
Absolutely.
It's good to have you here. You know, we sometimes when politicians or people running for office come in and the conversation is just all about the issues, which of course it should be, but I've had this week to myself, so more relaxed kind of. And it's more time. Is basically what I'm saying. So we went in the time machine here. Ike Everard, he's a big Husky fan. We went in the time machine here, and we got a photo of you. We'll put this up here. That's you right there, number 55, the Sun Bowl, 1979, huh?
Calling his shots. And my best friend, number 73, continues to be my best friend on my right. I spoke with him early this morning. He said, don't embarrass him. His name is Doug Martin, and I love him to death. We've been fishing since those days, and we continue to fish to this day, catching crappie.
All right. What was your best Husky memory?
1978 Rose Bowl. We were underdogs. No one expected us to win. We were playing in front of millions of people, just underdogs. And Warren Moon was our quarterback. Doug and I were starters on the defense, and we won that game. We defied all odds. And I think because of that, our friendships remain intact to this day. And it's nice being the underdog in a situation where literally millions of people didn't give us a chance.
Yeah. It's like I remember when I was a kid. We had to earn it back then. When I was a kid, I used to sell programs out in front of it was Husky Stadium, but I was stationed right over there by Heck Ed, trying to get people to come over the bridge, and I would be selling actually the Seattle Times, because Seattle Times had like the program in it and everything else. And if I was lucky, someone would always give me a ticket. You know what I'm saying? And so I'd be up in there in Husky Stadium, as a kid, like, wow, it's an amazing experience.
Well, one thing that people don't know about the University of Washington, they see a lot of our current stars in the last couple of decades, but the University of Washington did not actively recruit in the Central District around Franklin and Garfield. They had a history of not recruiting, and Coach Don James, I think one of the greatest coaches to come out of there, actively went to Garfield and sat in my living room, and again, excuse me, I did not have a lot of people that had gone to school. I'm aging myself a little bit, but you may remember under his predecessor, Coach Jim Owens, all of the black football players were in protest, and they were very organized because of the treatment of African-American football players. And so we grew up knowing that there was an issue, but Coach James was way in front of his time and recruited right there. And then, of course, Anthony Allen followed me the next year. My coach, Al Roberts, who was the coach at Garfield, came to the University of Washington. So I was sort of part of a movement to the University of Washington that, again, after me, produced so many great athletes coming out of Garfield, Franklin, Rainier Beach, Cleveland, the whole South End.
Yeah, the dog father, Coach James. All right, well, it's good stuff, man. Well, clearly you're running for office, and sometimes we sit in here and we'd be like, man, I don't know why anybody would want this job. Well, that's a good starting point. I know we've asked you that before, but our audience is always changing. Why are you running for mayor of Seattle?
Well, I ask myself that sometimes, and I say that in jest because it's a very, very tough job, and the job has not been a great success for many of our past mayors. And one of the either sad or issues that I have to deal with on occasion is I realize I'm a public figure, having been in office for 12 years, and a lot of people just don't know me. They haven't had coffee with me or haven't worked on a project with me, and so I see some things people say or write, and it's just not truthful or it's inaccurate, and I'm a big target, and that's the discouraging part, where people will say, well, he stands for this or he said this, and they take things out of context. The encouraging part is that this city has been rebuilt a few times. They've sort of reinvented themselves over the course of years. When people complain about gentrification now as an example, they don't realize, people like me that have been around for a while, that I can take you down Rainier Avenue South as an example, and I could tell you what you think is new or older, what used to be there 20 years ago, 25 years ago. When I talk to people about the Milk Barn or Rainer Cinema or things like that were moved out. Happy Valley Restaurant, where we had fond memories of having good food and fellowshipping with friends, that when those places are gone and people are seeing what's happening now, they think, oh, this is happening now. No, there's been a systematic, institutional events that have occurred in our city that just didn't start in the last 4 or 5, 6 years. And so I think that I draw upon an experience and a passion for people and for the city that quite honestly is unprecedented in many ways because I've lived through it. And again, I'll take Rainier Valley Community Development Fund as a prime example. That when we looked at the light rail going down south, that now people marvel at and say, this is a good thing for our community. Yes, it is. But the original plans were for light rail to be below ground. Yeah. So what we did then is we were involved in our Save Our Valley effort, and then I was involved in incorporating a $50 million institution to make sure that our residents and our small businesses could stay in our community. That was 20 years ago. I actually served as its executive director for a while until we found a new one. So when I see major events that have occurred in this city, and now with the George Floyd murder, with businesses that have been around for 20 or 30 years going out of business, with police reform, the urgent need for it, I think now is the time to get involved. And that's the inspiration. That's what wakes me up in the morning, that I think that someone that has been doing this work, who you can go anywhere in the city, who people have worked with me. There are people that I went to kindergarten with, the TT Minor on my campaign team, says, well, Bruce has been doing the same things and fighting for the same things. So that's what encourages me about running for mayor.
All right.
You're a good listener, man. That's why you're good. You let me go on and on.
No,
Go on and interrupt me.
No, but this is, don't worry. You get to talking crazy, I'm going to interrupt you. But the thing is we want to bring people on here. It is an educational platform. So it's not necessarily for my ego. It's for our viewers to be able to learn something. You touched on gentrification. I know that MHA is one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about. Can you put up the slide there that says MHA? Seattle Housing Affordability Law forces hardworking homeowners to pay ransom for building permit. And this was an article in the Institute for Justice. Yeah. And so, in one part of the conversation, clearly people, we hear you like, man, against gentrification, everything else. There is a segment, especially elders in the black community in the Central District, who are fairly upset at you about MHA and what the MHA and upzoning has done to them and, to their taxes, to permits and everything else. What is your position on MHA, and is the MHA rolled out the way that you expected it to back when you were backing it? Yeah.
So, again, I've read criticisms about my support and, quite candidly, the full council's support, because it was a 9-0 vote, the full council's support for MHA. And so I like the opportunity to explain why we passed it. So first of all, you have to look at the context with which it came into being. That was part of the HALA work, the Housing Affordability and Living Advisory Committee. And we looked at 65 recommendations on how to prevent gentrification and how to keep a more diverse residents living in our city. 65 recommendations. And when I say we, it was not the council. It were community advocates, community groups, people of color, people from the faith-based community, et cetera. And many of those recommendations, such as making sure people with convictions on their criminal record could have access to housing, making sure people had access to capital, making sure that in order to keep people in their homes, their existing homes, we make sure they had access to capital. Tax exemption programs, being aggressive there, such that we know taxes alone could force people out of the houses. So we looked at the HALA recommendations, and we looked at what the city had already done to some extent successfully in South Lake Union and downtown, and that was if builders wanted to go up or have an increased floor area ratio, FAR, they had to pay into a fund for affordable housing. Now, there was an argument as to whether the affordable housing had to be in South Lake Union or to downtown or anywhere in the city, so we relaxed that standard such that if they want extra square footage, they have to pay in the fund. And that is how we're going to make sure we get affordable housing. So the intent on MHA was to build a fund for affordable housing. So then when the HALA committee looked at that, again with all of the players who fight against gentrification, when they elected to pass their recommendations with MHA onto the council that we passed, it was precisely for that. So now, what does it intend to do? It intends to do exactly that. Look at multifamily units, allow the developer to have more square footage to go higher, and to pay into a fund or build within the unit affordable housing, 60% of area median income as an example. So what I tell to critics, and these are fine people, we're all trying to get to the same place. Who in their right mind want people with lower income to be forced out of the city, right? Assume a positive.
Is that a trick question?
No, I mean,
there's
because
a lot
no
of
one
people
says
that
that.
want poor people to get pushed out the city.
Well, I'm talking about the people making the decisions. You don't get elected on that platform. You don't have a council of 9 who I believe are committed to affordable housing, and even the mayors, and particularly go to the Seattle.gov website and look at the HALA recommendation. Literally, there were, I like being accurate on my facts, but I want to say 40 to 50 entities, many of the names you'll recognize from the housing community, making these recommendations. So now, to answer your question directly, is it working out the way it's supposed to be? Is it pushing people out and allowing developers to just ignore the needs of the community? Well, that's exactly what we're going to look at under my Race and Data initiative. You see, I don't like arguing in theory. I like looking at the data, just like we did for COVID. So, but we have to also understand something, that we are fighting some laws of economics that are really, really tough. Our city is a rich city, right? When you have Amazon and Microsoft and Starbucks and Boeing, and we have the high-tech industries here, we are bringing in 2019, I want to say we're bringing in about 1,000 people a week for some of these jobs. And so that's just the nature of a large city.
Well, I think that one of the issues, that at least I hear in my community, your community, the Central District, is that how come areas like Magnolia and Queen Anne aren't being upzoned like the Central District is?
Well, what I anticipate is, number one, you do have historical wealth in certain areas. I mean, that's just a reality of it. And so there's been a lot of talk about how we handle single-family zoning, and sort of the, there's arguments that that's a racist design to begin with, because rich people could decide to stay in their homes and poor people are forced to look at other alternatives. So what I've proposed many times, and I was one of the supporters of the ADUs and DADUs, the attached dwelling units, to allow people some flexibility. But you will see again that I think we have zoning capacity for a couple of 100,000 more units. And so the areas become, what areas make sense right now? Access to transit, access to jobs, access to social services, trying to have a walkable community. We relaxed the parking requirements, as an example. People said, man, you got to force, we get tired of all these cars around the city. So we relaxed the parking requirements, realizing that often we're trying to encourage people to use transit and other modes of transportation to get as creative as possible. So under my Race and Data initiative, we're looking at precisely that. Where are there outcomes that clearly demonstrate disparity? And not just for housing, that's a critical component. Jobs, educational outcomes, health outcomes, access to food. See, one of the arguments I have with particularly people on either the far left or the far right of the political spectrum is everyone's sort of accusatory. Wow, that MHA is bad, or this is bad. And I will say, I listen to you, I feel your pain, but I have to look at the data. I like looking at the numbers.
Well, and the numbers are important. And to really, make a lot of concise decisions, the data and the numbers are important. I think that there's also the flip side of it, where we have to look at the human experience and, the emotional impact. I would say this, though, on MHA, because I know a lot of the people who are impacted and everything else. I'd like to take this conversation even offline. Maybe we get all these people together with you in a room and, have some coffee, and you can hear people's experience. So then it isn't all just vicariously through the internet or through this and that and everything else. Because I know with that and matching with the data that you talk about, then there's even bigger picture of what people are facing.
Well, first of all, that's how I work. I don't work in my office or with microphones and TVs on. As people know, the work I've done with your brother to Royal Esquire Club, which, by the way, is the largest facility that was on the brink of bankruptcy and had few members and no strategic plan, that what we did was we gathered and we met over coffee, and we met at homes, had pizza, more than that to eat, actually, and mapped out a strategic plan and got our memberships and saved the building. And that's critically important when you're talking about cultural preservation, not just brick and mortar, cultural preservation. And so I welcome that work. And I'd also tell you another element that's really not talked about in the discussion of housing, that when my black grandfather came here from Louisiana, and my father and their brothers went to a school earlier. Well, my father was too young, but they went to a school called McDonough 35 down in New Orleans, Louisiana. Look it up. McDonough 35 was the only public school during then where African Americans could attend. And my two uncles came here and graduated from the University of Washington in the 50s. Okay, they came here for what? Jobs, opportunity, housing. So my grandfather built a home down around the Arboretum. And I look at the Japanese side of my family. They came here for what? Jobs, opportunity, and housing. And so in the African American community, as an example, the owning of real estate has been our primary asset to create wealth in our community. And so I am passionate about making sure that we create wealth. And I tell people that this is the biggest asset you could pass down to your children. And so when I look at the zoning issues, I inject that into the conversation because, yeah, we want to make it affordable, but we also want to create living assets to create generational wealth in the African American community and other underrepresented communities who need that.
Right. Now, speaking of being able to create generational wealth and fix some issues that are in our community, 1 year ago, Mayor Durkin pledged $100 million. And 1 year later, we've actually, we can put this overlay up there. I'm sorry, I'm out of order, all you.
Sorry, which one is it?
It says no. No, I don't see it there. Follow the money. There we go. Follow the money. Mayor Durkin's $100 million pledge 1 year later. Where's the money at and where's the money going? And we'll put this link in the comments over here because what we did at Converge is we actually went, there's 4 different categories where the money is at, 30 million, 30 million, 30 million, and 10 million. And we created a resource guide for our community because, yeah, I mean, you're a politician. Don't take it personal, but, politicians are really good for like, yeah, this and that. And, and the average person is distracted. And we just, we took all the political talk out of it and said, hey, this is what Office of Civil Rights is doing. This is what ECI is doing. Here's their website. Here's how you contact them. Here's every document that was involved in the process. So that's up on our blog right now. We encourage people to go check that out. But my question to you isn't so much a past tense of like, how did we get here to this 100 million and everything else, but as if you become mayor, what is your commitment to find continuous ways? One, yes, in money, because money definitely needs to be injected, but also, in innovations around policies and innovations around creating economic drivers in our community and addressing some of these things that have been in decline for a very long time. The income gap, home ownership in decline, the education gap. These are the big 3 that are continuously impacting our community.
So I talk a lot on my campaign about creating a brand new department called the Seattle Job Center, and people don't fully understand the concept often, and I appreciate when I have a time to just go into depth about it. It's not just going on a job board and saying I'm applying for that job. It's much broader than that. That it ties into from my strategy from 0 to 4, our work on pre-K when you look at brain development. It then pipes into the Seattle Promise, which quite candidly I was the first elected to support, paying for money, because it's a state responsibility to pay for education, paying for money from the city for young kids to be able to go to college for free. Okay, so I started that, got the votes, got it in the budget. Now we're using the soda tax and other revenues to support that. And then it goes into the Seattle Job Center because I always thought it critically unfair where certain people have the resources to know where the grants are, to know where the training is. For example, that there's a program at Microsoft called DigiCare, which teaches young women how to think about navigating through the technology field because there's a huge disparity for women, and particularly African American young girls.